Welcome back to StabtheDragon Productions for book review number 5. As we took a look at The Vikings by Else Roesdahl. Else Roesdahl. Why a book about the Vikings? Well, it's cold here in Fort Worth. Winter front is coming in, so we're looking at temps down in the single digits the next couple of days. But I've reviewed a couple of previous history books, and both were on Columbus, and then there's a couple of fiction books. But after studying Columbus for a bit, I started asking questions about the Viking discovery of America, and knew I had to do some investigation of that story. Of course, after looking at Leif Erikson, I had to have the backstory, so now I'm at least knee-deep in studying the Vikings. This book by Roesdahl was one of the first books I bought about the Vikings a long time ago, so here we are. First of all, just the facts. The Vikings, revised edition by Else Roesdahl, was translated by Susan M. Margerson and Kirsten Williams and published by Penguin Books, London in 1998. But the original book was published in Denmark in 1987. This paperback edition has 324 pages, and I read it this year, 2022, from September to December. I purchased this book in 2000 for about $15.95. The book is organized into the following parts: Introduction, the Viking Age and its sources, Scandinavia, the expansion, and conclusion. Within those broad sections are several subsections, but they're not really labeled as chapters, but I think you could count them as chapters. There's also two good sections of black and white photos, and there are numerous maps and drawings throughout in a simple sketching of black and white. My letter grade for this book is an A-. Recommendation. This is a very good, solid survey of the Viking Age and ancient Scandinavia. I do recommend this book if you want a fairly concise yet adequately thorough study of the Vikings. But some words of caution go with this recommendation. First of all, I'm fairly uninformed in the topic, and this is the first book on the subject I've read cover to cover. Secondly, the nature of the subject is such that a survey is going to appear a bit disjointed or choppy. Writing came very late to the Scandinavians, so you're dealing with most of the primary evidence coming from archaeology. Plus, we're dealing with one people group, but three distinct geographic areas, and then those eventually became nations: Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Finally, this book is an English translation of a Danish book. All of this adds to the difficulty level of reading the book, but that being said, I want to emphasize that this is a very good introduction to the topic that I wouldn't hesitate to recommend to anyone with an interest in the Vikings or for any classroom purpose. It's not, however, an easy or quick read. Review details. Roesdahl's opening paragraph is on target and describes one of my key reasons for reading the book. She says, "The Viking Age is shot through with the spirit of adventure. For 300 years, from just before AD 800 until well into the 11th century, Scandinavians from the modern countries of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden played a decisive role in many parts of Europe. The Vikings affected almost every region accessible to their ships and left traces that are still part of life today." Page 3. Roesdahl, throughout her book, stresses that these Vikings were not merely the simple, violent, barbarian pirates and raiders that modern media has portrayed. The book proves that the Vikings were complex, thoughtful. They were traders and merchants, explorers and diplomats, besides warriors. "The picture of a barbaric North is no longer valid," she said on page 10. "Their encounters with the rest of Europe could be violent for sure, but they also carried a wide variety of cultures from one corner of the world to another, and they themselves were influenced by those who they conquered." Roesdahl discusses the sources for studying the Viking Age in her first chapter. While recognizing the late 8th century AD timeframe as a good place to start the Viking Age, she points to an earlier time for the rise of the Viking culture, to the early 8th century. Archaeology, rune stones, and the writings of other Europeans preceded the writings of the Icelandic sagas in the 1200 to 1400s. One of the main problems with finding Viking history is identified by Roesdahl as this. Apart from runestones, contemporary written information about the Viking homelands is almost exclusively the work of foreign clerics, few of whom had visited Scandinavia. Page 15. Yet she sees the bright side in that. Unlike written sources and place names, archaeological sources increase constantly. New material is added almost daily, and occasionally sensational finds turn traditional interpretations upside down. Page 20. One of the major bright spots in the book for me was the 4 pages she included about the geography of Scandinavia on pages 25 to 29. I would wish this section to be greatly expanded, but it was quite helpful. The one sentence in the section that really gave me a wow moment was, stretching from the North Cape at the northernmost tip of Norway to Denmark's southern border, it constitutes half the length of Europe measured north to south. Page 25. So that was a phenomenal thing. I mean, Scandinavia is half the length of Europe? One of the major bright spots in the book for me also was a marvelous section on social history, daily lives of the Vikings, including everything from their physical size, their lifespans, clothing, homes, and eating habits. She discusses the runic form of writing and then the introduction of the Latin alphabet. She says, the Latin alphabet accompanied the introduction of Christianity into Scandinavia in the 10th and 11th centuries, along with the increase in European influence and the growing centralization of power. Page 50. In discussing Viking society, Roesdahl does not hesitate to discuss slavery. Like almost every other culture on Earth, the Vikings practiced slavery. Imagine that. The purpose of many Viking expeditions, she writes, was no doubt to capture slaves. The warriors might keep them, sell them, or possibly exchange them for a ransom from rich relatives or from the Christian church, which was opposed on principle to Christians being the slaves of pagans. The ransoming of Christian captives as an act of piety is frequently mentioned in the accounts of the conversion of Scandinavia. The author tells us that some graves tell the story that as a master died, a slave would be killed to be buried with the master. Notice to all, the practice of slavery occurred many centuries before America was a nation or the Confederacy acquired slaves. Slavery was a worldwide practice, and with the Vikings it was primarily white-on-white slavery. So there's that. In discussing women, sexual roles, and children, Roesdahl writes, given the importance of the family unit, consisting of father, mother, spouse, and siblings in Viking society, it is not surprising that the largest and most splendid runic monuments mention women. Page 59. And we learn that while women accompanied the large Viking armies that fought in England and France, there is scant evidence of women Viking warriors, much to the disappointment of modern movie makers. Roesdahl also does not present any evidence for the gay, lesbian, or trans Vikings. I'm sure to the disappointment of the LGBTQ community. Maybe it was the extreme cold, perhaps the long sea voyages, or the nature of medieval life in general. I don't know. The book has a very good chapter on the old and new religions, where Roesdahl discusses the paganism of Viking society and the changes that brought Christianity into that society. But of course, the difficulties of studying the Old Norse religions are that, quote, virtually all documentary evidence about the pre-Christian religion in Scandinavia was written by Christians, and the fullest accounts were written several centuries after the conversion. Page 148. Here's an account of a Viking funeral written by a Muslim Arab envoy, Ibn Fadlan, on the Volga River. When a chieftain dies, slaves and servants are asked who will die with him. The one who volunteers cannot alter the decision. In this particular case, it was a woman who was treated with great courtesy while the burial was being prepared. The woman who was to die went around to each tent in the camp and had sexual intercourse with its owner. After this, she performed various other rituals and was finally taken into the tent of her dead master. 6 men followed her into the tent and had sexual intercourse with her. Then she was killed. Paganism. Eventually, Christianity replaced the pagan religions of Scandinavia. Roesdahl writes, "What was the appeal of Christianity, and what were the methods of its missionaries? Christianity was above all a victorious religion. That God and Christ were strong and good helpers could be seen in the power and splendor of churches abroad, and in pictures of the triumphant Christ. The impotence of the old religion was revealed when missionaries destroyed sanctuaries and did not suffer retribution." Page 160. The writers at the Gospel Coalition are having a conniption fit right now. The author makes it clear that the politics and economics of medieval Europe played a key role in the conversion of the Vikings. Imagine that. The author describes a few kingly conversions where Vikings were abroad, usually in England, and saw Christianity as a powerful means of gaining wealth and power, and were converted. When they went back home to Norway, they brought priests with them and used a variety of means, some not so gentle, to convert their people. Roesdahl's section on Viking expansion is fascinating and was one of the main reasons I read this book. The difficulty level can be high, though, because of all the discussion of archaeology, which she made as non-technical as she could, but it's a bit of a tough read. She does not Hollywood up the story, so to say. She tells it matter-of-factly, scientifically. It's still an exciting story of seeing step by step how the Vikings conquered England, Scotland, Ireland, France, and the North Atlantic Islands. The reasons for the Vikings leaving Norway or Denmark were many. Dissatisfaction with their current chieftains, a desire for honor and loot, for trade or land. The arable land in Norway never exceeded 3%. So they had to have land for their farmers. One of the great achievements of the Viking Age was that Scandinavians were the first Europeans to set foot in America. Those who reached North America were farmers from Greenland. The settlers in these new lands were predominantly Norwegian, page 262. Christianity was accepted by the Vikings in Iceland by AD 1000, and it spread to Greenland. Roesdahl tells us of Eric the Red naming Greenland so that it would draw more settlers. A scam artist. Imagine that. Archaeologists have discovered what they believe to be the first church of Greenland at Brattahlid. My Greenland speak is pretty weak there. One of the best exports from Greenland? Live polar bears. Go figure. What is my final evaluation of this book? What are the strengths and weaknesses? The book is remarkably thorough for its length. The author covers a pleasingly wide array of topics, and I came away much the richer for the experience. However, perhaps because of the topical nature of the book combined with the translation factor, the book did not seem to flow very smoothly, nor was it very exciting to read it in places. The amount of detail in the archaeology I found to be similar to some books that I've read on the ancient Near East, like ancient Sumer. So it does demand some concentration. All things considered, probably not a high school text, but college text, certainly. And for my first book on the Viking Age, this book is solid. I can highly recommend it, giving it an A-, and that's for the difficulty level and the translation difficulty perhaps. But if you want a good book to begin your study of the Viking Age, read Roesdahl's book, The Vikings. Well, that's all for StabtheDragon this December 21st of 2022, and we will see you next time out here